Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are moving past the glossy magazine covers and the indelible movie posters to take a really exhaustive look at Audrey Hepburn. Someone who, for most of us, exists as this perfect, elegant, and almost impossibly serene silhouette.
That iconic image, the
Yeah.
little black dress, the pearls, the cigarette holder, it's so powerfully ingrained in global culture. It really is.
Mm.
But if you stop there, you miss the true narrative. Our mission today is to quickly and thoroughly synthesize the sources that peel back those layers, to reveal the complex, often contradictory foundation of her identity.
Right.
The world-class film star, yes, the fashion revolutionary, absolutely, but maybe most profoundly, the dedicated humanitarian whose ferocious drive was rooted in her own brutal wartime trauma.
Exactly. We're moving past Holly Golightly to understand a woman who is really forged by history. And when you look at her competitive accolades, I mean, she belongs to one of the most exclusive clubs in entertainment history.
Yeah.
She's one of the few entertainers, and certainly one of the most beloved, who achieved what we call the EGOT. So that's winning the Academy, Emmy, Grammy, and Tony Awards competitively.
And not only that, but you have to consider her legacy against the whole sweep of Hollywood history. The American Film Institute ranked her as the third greatest female screen legend from the classical Hollywood cinema era.
The third greatest.
When you see her placed right behind Katharine Hepburn and Bette Davis, you realize the magnitude of her cultural footprint.
It's an astonishing list of honors, really. But what's truly compelling, and what the source material really drives home, is how her career success directly contrasts with her origins.
Completely.
Her entire life story is this unique synthesis. She was the product of aristocratic European roots. Her mother was a baroness, but she was also a victim of horrific wartime poverty, the Dutch famine, and intense personal abandonment.
And that profound contrast, that internal tension between, refinement and just raw survival, it set the foundation for everything. It shaped her physical fragility, her professional choices, and ultimately her fierce, non-negotiable commitment to philanthropy. She spent the first half of her life surviving, and the second half, in a way, paying back the world for her survival.
Okay, so let's dive into this complicated, really turbulent beginning. The woman the world came to know as Audrey Hepburn was born Audrey Kathleen Rustin in Ixelles, Brussels in 1929. She was truly multinational from birth, though she held solely British citizenship throughout her life.
Which is an interesting detail in itself.
It is.
Her heritage was split half Dutch through her mother, and her aptitude for languages was just incredible. She was fluent in Dutch, French, Italian, German, and Spanish. She was, in the truest sense, a proper European citizen.
And we really need to emphasize the sheer depth of her aristocratic lineage through her mother, Ella. Ella was Baroness Ella van Hemstra, a member of the Dutch nobility.
And this wasn't, minor gentry. This was the real deal. Her father, Audrey's maternal grandfather, Baron Arnoud van Heemstra, had been a prominent politician. He served as the mayor of Arnhem and later as the governor of Dutch Guiana. This was a family of extreme social and political prominence, accustomed to security and privilege.
Right. Which makes the background of her father, Joseph Rustin, feel almost like a slight theatrical construction by comparison. He was a British subject born in Austria-Hungary, but he later changed his surname to the double-barreled Hepburn Rustin.
And why the addition?
Well, because he mistakenly believed, or perhaps just preferred to believe, that he was descended from James Hepburn, the 4th Earl of Bothwell. It adds this strange, almost fictional air to the family structure right before it utterly descends into this terrible chaos that defined her childhood.
And speaking of terrible chaos, this is where it gets really interesting and, intensely uncomfortable. We have to address the unsettling political and family trauma that unfolded in the mid-1930s. The sources confirm that both Ella the Baroness and Joseph, the self-titled descendant of an earl, became involved with the British Union of Fascists, the BUF.
That is just a staggering fact to reconcile with the icons she became. The sources detail how her mother, Ella, wasn't just a passive member. She actually met Adolf Hitler.
She met him?
And wrote favorable articles about him for the BUF magazine. So we're talking about a woman, a child who would later become a victim of the Nazi regime, whose parents were, for a period, sympathetic to that very ideology.
It's a stunning, necessary piece of history, and it really speaks to the confusing, turbulent political climate of the 1930s, particularly amongst the sort of disillusioned European aristocracy. However, this political shadow was compounded by an intensely personal and immediate wound. Joseph abruptly left the family in 1935 after a scene in Brussels.
And this event was emotionally devastating for her. Hepburn herself later recalled it as the most traumatic event of my life. She spoke openly about how children need both parents and the profound, agonizing pain of feeling dumped and abandoned at such a young, formative age.
And that abandonment created an emotional vacuum that she spent much of her adult life trying to fill. It was an emotional wound that never truly healed, even when she later renewed contact.
Right, she found him again later in life.
She did. After she became famous, she located him through the Red Cross in the 1960s and supported him financially until his death. Yet the sources specify that despite all her efforts, her financial support, he remained emotionally detached. That pursuit of emotional connection, often followed by emotional distance, it just became a constant theme in her romantic and private life.
But let's go back to her mother's political perspective, because that, thankfully for history, had a violent and very personal turning point. Her mother's attitude regarding Nazism completely and irreversibly changed after 1942.
The catalyst was the execution of her uncle, Baron Otto von Limburg-Stirum, in 1942. He was a key figure targeted by the Germans and executed in retaliation for resistance activity, specifically because of his family's high prominence in Dutch society.
It's the difference between an abstract political idea and the brutal personal reality of fascism, isn't it?
Exactly. That execution, coupled with her half-brother Ian being deported to a German labor camp and her other half-brother Alex going into hiding. It forced Ella to confront the absolute reality of the system she had once written favorably about. It radically transformed their existence from one of conflicted political involvement into one of pure, grinding survival.
Which brings us to the devastating years of the Dutch famine, from 1939 to 1945. When Britain declared war on Germany, Audrey's mother had moved her back to Arnhem, hoping the Netherlands would remain neutral.
A fatal miscalculation.
A huge one. Instead, they were occupied in 1940. Audrey had been studying ballet at the Arnhem Conservatory, but her life quickly devolved into a nightmare of hiding, fear, and chronic hardship.
And the necessity of disguise was immediate and stark.
Yeah.
Because of her British citizenship and her English-sounding name, she started using the pseudonym Edda van Hemstra to hide her identity during the German occupation. The family initially survived through the desperate, common belief that the occupation would be brief, 6 months, maybe a year, but it just dragged on for 5 brutal years.
And while some early accounts of her resistance work were sometimes, questioned or maybe exaggerated, subsequent detailed research and Hepburn's own candid statements provide compelling, specific evidence of her genuine support for the Dutch resistance.
For sure. She gave silent dance performances, referred to as underground concerts, where the proceeds were raised for the resistance effort.
The atmosphere of these underground concerts must have been electric and just terrifying. They were held in secret locations with no applause allowed to avoid drawing attention. She was just a teenager, a dedicated ballet student, risking her life to raise funds.
She was also reportedly involved in more dangerous logistical support. The sources indicate she delivered the underground newspaper, carried messages that were often slipped into her ballet shoes,
Wow.
and took food to downed Allied flyers hiding near Velp.
Crucially, during the Battle of Arnhem, her family temporarily hid a British paratrooper in their home. These were not peripheral activities. These were genuine acts of resistance that carried the death penalty.
What's truly heartbreaking and what she recalled with such chilling clarity was the constant exposure to trauma as a witness. She was forced to see the horrors unfolding around her, particularly the fate of her Jewish neighbors.
She witnessed the transportation of Dutch Jews to concentration camps. She recounted seeing young men put against the wall and shot as punishment for resistance activities. Her observation of the Jewish children being deported was just heartbreakingly simple, but so devastating. She said, "I was a child observing a child." She later insisted that anyone who discounted the awful things heard about the Nazis was wrong, stating flatly, "It's worse than you could ever imagine." And the visceral details of the famine conditions are truly shocking, especially when you contrast them with the elegant image she later cultivated. The famine, known as the Hunger Winter, was horrific. The sources describe her family resorting to desperate measures, including making flour out of tulip bulbs just to bake cakes and biscuits.
Tulip bulbs. I mean, we think of them as symbols of Dutch beauty, but they became a source of starchy carbohydrates recommended by Dutch doctors during that starvation period. The consumption of tulip bulbs, coupled with the severe lack of nutrients, had profound and lasting physical effects.
She was living off nettles and grass, drinking water just to fill her stomach. When the war ended in 1945, Hepburn became gravely ill. She suffered from jaundice, severe anemia, edema,
That's the swelling from fluid retention.
yeah, and a respiratory infection. The sources make it clear that her life was hanging by a thread.
It was a shocking twist of fate that likely saved her. A family friend, a former prisoner of war, sent thousands of cigarettes. Her mother, Ella, sold them on the black market to buy the necessary penicillin to treat her infections. The black market, in a strange way, provided the medical lifeline.
So we have to pause here. What does this deep, traumatic history really mean when we look at her future global stardom?
It means everything. The almost unbelievable contrast between her sheltered, aristocratic childhood, a life of relative privilege, and the horrific years of survival set the absolute foundation for everything she became. That period cultivated an intense appreciation of simple life, a physical fragility that manifested as her distinctive slender frame.
Her weak constitution, as they called it, was a direct result of malnutrition.
Exactly. And a fierce, visceral humanitarian commitment. She knew firsthand what it meant to be a child on the receiving end of international aid. And that experience ultimately directed the final, most meaningful act of her life. It was a debt of gratitude she felt she had to repay, and it was non-negotiable.
So the war ends, and Audrey, physically and emotionally scarred, moves forward. She turns her attention to her first love, ballet. She moved with her mother to Amsterdam, training rigorously there, and later accepted a scholarship to the prestigious Ballet Rambert in London. She was incredibly dedicated. For a moment, it really seemed her career path was set.
But again, the body told the story of her trauma. When she arrived in London, she was told by Marie Rambert herself that despite her obvious talent and dedication, her height, she was 5 feet 7 inches, combined with that weak constitution, those long-lasting effects of wartime malnutrition, it would prevent her from reaching the status of prima ballerina.
That must have been just devastating. To realize that the famine she survived had fundamentally altered her whole trajectory. She had devoted years to this dream, only to be told her physical frame just couldn't withstand the professional demands of that peak role.
It was a brutal reality check, but it forced one of the greatest career pivots in history. Instead of achieving her childhood dream, she chose to concentrate on acting as a second-best option. Initially, she believed it was just a temporary step. She needed income.
So she started modestly enough, really paying her dues. She began as a chorus girl in West End musical reviews, including the very cheekily named Sauce Tartare and Sauce Piquante. She took minor, often uncredited roles in films like The Lavender Hill Mob in 1951, all while diligently working to refine her craft, including taking elocution lessons to develop that smooth, recognizable voice we all know today.
And this is where fate, or perhaps just remarkable luck, intervened, leading to her big break. It happened almost accidentally through her involvement in a small, bilingual film called Monte Carlo Baby. And this anecdote from the sources is truly legendary. While filming in Monte Carlo in 1951, the famed French novelist Colette happened to be at the Hôtel de Paris.
Colette, who was frail and in her late 70s at the time, saw Audrey and was just captivated by her gamine look and her innate grace. Colette immediately insisted that Hepburn be cast in the title role of the Broadway play Gigi, which was based on Colette's 1944 novella.
She literally pointed and said, "There is my Gigi." And just like that, Audrey was yanked from minor film roles and chorus lines and thrust onto the Broadway stage. She stepped onto the stage having never really carried a lead role or spoken extensive lines on stage before, which necessitated private coaching on her stage projection.
But when Gigi opened in New York, the critics were unanimous. She received high praise, winning a Theatre World Award. Life magazine called her a hit, and the New York Times critic, Brooks Atkinson, said her quality was so winning and so right that she is the success of the evening. That play ran for 219 performances before touring extensively, turning the accidental actress into a genuine stage sensation.
And that Broadway success was instantly parlayed into her first starring role in Hollywood, Roman Holiday in 1953. Director William Wyler was initially looking at established stars like Elizabeth Taylor for the role of the runaway Princess Anne, but after viewing Hepburn's screen test, he was entirely won over by her distinct charm.
What was it about that screen test? The sources recall Wyler saying she had everything he was looking for: charm, innocence, and talent. He also noted something crucial. She also was very funny. She was absolutely enchanting, and we said, that's the girl. It was that combination of elegance and genuine, approachable humor that set her apart.
And the debut was just extraordinary. She achieved instant icon status, cementing it with an unprecedented Triple Crown win. For that single performance in Roman Holiday, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Drama, and the BAFTA Award for Best British Actress in a Leading Role.
Wow.
That clean sweep of all three major competitive awards for a single film debut was virtually unique at the time.
The recognition was so immediate and so overwhelming that even her legendary co-star, Gregory Peck, had to step in and apply the brakes. The sources confirm that originally the credits were slated to read, "Introducing Audrey Hepburn" beneath Peck's established name.
And Peck, sensing the shifting currents of Hollywood, insisted on equal billing. His quote is fantastic. It shows incredible professionalism and foresight. He told Wyler, "You've got to change that because she'll be a big star and I'll look like a big jerk." He recognized her transcendent star power instantly, proving that her debut wasn't just a flash in the pan.
Following Roman Holiday, she was immediately signed to a 7-picture contract with Paramount. Crucially, the contract intentionally included a 12-month period between films, allowing her time to pursue stage work, which is a testament to her serious approach to acting and her desire to balance the demands of Hollywood with her theater background.
Her golden age was now in full swing, dominating the period from 1954 to 1967. She immediately followed up her Oscar win with Sabrina in 1954, earning her a second Academy Award nomination and kicking off a collaboration that would define her entire persona, her partnership with designer Hubert de Givenchy.
And 1954 truly was the most astonishing year of her competitive EGOT journey. Just 3 days after winning her Oscar for Roman Holiday, she won the Tony Award for Best Leading Actress in a play for Ondine, where she played a delicate water nymph.
So she became one of only 3 actresses in history to win the competitive Oscar and the competitive Tony for Best Actress in the same year. That kind of simultaneous recognition across different mediums is truly remarkable and speaks to her immediate versatility.
She continued selecting challenging, serious roles, moving far beyond the romantic ingenue mold. Most notably, Nun's Story in 1959. This role earned her 3rd Oscar nomination, and critics widely hailed it as her finest performance to date.
The detail here is significant, and it speaks to her dedication, connecting right back to her wartime sense of duty. She spent a full year researching and working on the challenging role. This included extensive consultations with former nuns and time spent in a convent in Belgium, devoting more time, energy, and thought to it than any of her previous screen performances. This wasn't about glamour. It was about internal discipline and understanding a spiritual life completely alien to her own celebrity.
The Nun's Story proved she wasn't just a charming personality, but a serious, dedicated actress. But of course, for the general public, the defining role remains Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's in 1961. This film solidified her as a style icon and defined 1960s sophistication.
Yet this role was a massive challenge for her personally. The sources mention the initial friction. Truman Capote, the novelist, famously wanted Marilyn Monroe for the role. But Hepburn took on the challenge, calling Holly Golightly the jazziest of my career.
She was absolutely playing against type, wasn't she?
Completely. Holly Golightly is this chaotic, flamboyant extrovert running from herself. Hepburn admitted later, "I'm an introvert. Playing the extroverted girl was the hardest thing I ever did." It highlights that fundamental disconnect between the sophisticated, carefree image she projected and the vulnerable, self-conscious person she was privately. A theme we'll definitely revisit later.
We also see her navigating the subtle power dynamics of the studio system in films like the comic thriller charade in 1963. She starred opposite Cary Grant, who was 59 while she was 34. Grant felt genuine discomfort about the age difference and the romantic interplay.
And to satisfy his concerns, and this is a great detail, the filmmakers altered the script so that her character was the one aggressively pursuing him. This was unusual for the era, putting the power dynamic in the hands of the female lead. The sources note that this adjustment made the experience positive for Grant, resulting in his famous quote, "All I want for Christmas is another picture with Audrey Hepburn."
And then we have the casting controversy of My Fair Lady in 1964. Julie Andrews, who originated the role of Eliza Doolittle on stage, was controversially passed over for the film version because producer Jack L. Warner calculated that Hepburn was a more bankable box office draw. Hepburn herself, aware of the injustice, even asked Warner to give the role to Andrews first.
The controversy was intensely painful for her, and it was deepened by the subsequent production decisions. Despite her having vocal preparation and having successfully sung her own parts in Funny Face, approximately 90% of her vocals for My Fair Lady were dubbed by the famous ghost singer Marty Nixon.
That must have been a crushing professional blow, even with the star power she possessed. The sources state Hepburn was deeply upset and reportedly walked off the set when she was informed of the final decision. She later admitted she would have never accepted the role if she had known they intended to dub nearly all of her singing.
It really reveals the complex power structure of Hollywood. Even an icon can be told that her own voice isn't sufficient for a project built around her image. Yet, despite the turmoil, she delivered a performance that earned her a Golden Globe nomination, and critics like Bosley Crowther applauded her, saying she superbly justifies the decision. She emerged from that crucible still celebrated, though wounded by the process.
Her final competitive Oscar nomination came in 1967 for Wait Until Dark. She played a terrorized blind woman in a genuinely chilling suspense thriller, earning her fifth and final competitive nomination, further demonstrating her commitment to dramatic range.
And the production of Wait Until Dark was difficult, filmed on the brink of her divorce from Mel Ferrer, who was also the film's producer. The emotional stress of the period caused her to lose 15 pounds, underscoring how physically and emotionally taxing the final phase of her initial career was. She chose that moment to essentially retire, recognizing the immense toll her career was taking on her personal life and her peace of mind.
Let's pivot now to her most persistent global legacy, the image itself. What's fascinating here is that Audrey Hepburn fundamentally provided an entirely alternative feminine ideal in the 1950s and 60s. She countered the overtly curvier, more sexualized figures dominating Hollywood at the time, specifically Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe.
She was a visual revolution. Her look was described using the French term gamine, meaning a slender, impish girl, characterized by her thick eyebrows, short hairstyle, and lean physique. Fashion photographer Cecil Beaton called her the public embodiment of our new feminine ideal in Vogue in 1954.
It was a democratic fashion ideal, too. As the sources point out, her look was not only distinct, but critically, it was easier for young women globally to emulate. Easier than the unattainable hourglass figures of the other major stars. She was cited, along with the later model Twiggy, as a key figure in making a very slim silhouette fashionable and aspirational.
And the foundation of this iconic look was her lifelong, non-negotiable partnership with French designer Hubert de Givenchy. The collaboration began almost comically on the set of Sabrina in 1954. Givenchy, upon receiving the request to design for Hepburn, mistakenly thought he was designing for the already established Katharine Hepburn.
That initial confusion led to one of the most fruitful friendships in fashion history. Upon meeting Audrey, they formed a deep, symbiotic, lifelong professional and personal bond. She became his muse, and he became the architect of her iconic persona.
Givenchy designed costumes for 6 of her films, including Breakfast at Tiffany's, Funny Face, and Charade, and styled her extensively off-screen. It was a partnership based on mutual respect for elegance and simplicity. Their collaboration cemented the idea of fashion as character development, not just ornamentation.
And her fashion influence went far beyond haute couture. The sources credit her with popularizing incredibly practical, simple items, like plain black leggings as outerwear, and boosting sales of Burberry trench coats, which she wore so memorably in Breakfast at Tiffany's. She democratized high fashion by making it look effortless and minimal.
And of course, the little black dress from Breakfast at Tiffany's is arguably the single most famous dress in cinema history. It became a global standard for elegance. The sheer, staggering, enduring monetary value of her style legacy is underlined by the fact that one of the versions of that dress sold at auction for a record sum of £467,200 in 2006. That value transcends fabric. It represents an entire era and a personality.
But despite this meticulously curated, glamorous external image, she was named the most beautiful woman of all time in some polls. Her private reality was deeply contradictory, almost painfully so. She confessed to profound insecurity throughout her life.
This is a critical insight for understanding her. She stated, "I hated myself at certain periods. I couldn't conquer these feelings. I found the only way to get the better of them was by adopting a forceful, concentrated drive."
That is such a powerful admission. The elegant, serene public persona, the woman who seemed completely at peace, was, by her own account, a mask. Forged out of a necessary self-imposed discipline to overcome feelings of inferiority and self-hatred rooted in her childhood trauma. She had to actively create the confident, serene Audrey Hepburn we saw on screen.
And this dichotomy extended to her everyday life. In her private moments, away from the demanding scrutiny of the public eye and the constraints of haute couture, she actually preferred casual, comfortable clothing. She was an inherently private introvert forced into the most public of careers.
After the emotional and physical strain of Wait Until Dark in 1967, Hepburn chose semi-retirement to prioritize her family and her mental well-being. This led to her decisive move to Tolochenaz, Switzerland, where she bought a 21-room country estate called Le Paisible, which translates quite simply to the peaceful one.
She sought intense privacy there, actively pushing back against the celebrity machine. But the location choice itself was deeply connected to her wartime trauma. She specifically chose the French-speaking part of Switzerland to ensure that her first son, Sean, did not learn German in school. This is a very clear, powerful echo of her traumatic wartime childhood, showing how far she would go to shield her children from that dark shadow.
Her personal life was often tumultuous, despite the serene facade. She had two marriages. First to American actor Mel Ferrer, which lasted 14 years, and then to Italian psychiatrist Andrea Dotti, which ended in 1982. The source material notes both marriages were strained by infidelity. Dotti was unfaithful with younger women, and Hepburn was reportedly involved with actor Ben Gazzara during the filming of Bloodline.
But her final and ultimately happiest long-term relationship was with Dutch actor Robert Wolders, which began in 1980 and lasted until her death. She considered them married, even without the official paperwork, stating candidly that the 9 years she spent with him were the happiest of her life.
After her semi-retirement in 1967, she acted only occasionally. Her last feature film cameo was in Steven Spielberg's Always in 1989. However, even in her later years, and posthumously, she was still adding to her remarkable collection of awards, finally completing her competitive ego status.
That final stretch of the EGOT was completed with 2 posthumous wins. She won her Grammy in 1994 for a spoken word recording called Audrey Hepburn's Enchanted Tales, a testament to her beautiful, recognizable voice. And she won her Emmy in 1993 for the documentary series Gardens of the World with Audrey Hepburn. These late-career nonfiction projects perfectly mirrored the quiet, contemplative life she had built in Switzerland.
This transition from one of the world's most glamorous film celebrities to a full-time, dedicated humanitarian is truly the capstone of her life story. It directly and powerfully connects back to the extreme survival we discussed in Part 1.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, her motivation for becoming a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador in 1989 was explicitly about repaying a debt of gratitude. She made it absolutely clear that she wanted to show profound thanks for the international aid she received as a child during the German occupation and the famine.
She often noted that during the famine, UNICEF and organizations like it were literally the difference between life and death for children in the Netherlands. She had actually contributed to UNICEF efforts quietly beginning in 1954, narrating radio programs telling children stories of war and recovery. But in 1989, she truly dedicated herself to the grueling field work, traveling to the world's most desperate places.
Her impact was immediate and raw, starting with her first major mission to Ethiopia in 1988, which was suffering from catastrophic famine. She traveled to Mekelle and visited an orphanage housing 500 starving children. She saw the full scale of human suffering up close, and her reaction was heartbreakingly honest and unvarnished.
She spoke about it with immense feeling, saying, "I have a broken heart. I feel desperate. The third world is a term I don't like very much because we're all one world. I want people to know that the largest part of humanity is suffering." She wasn't an actress playing a role. She was a witness speaking truth.
She described mothers and children walking for weeks, settling into makeshift camps where they might simply die waiting. She was particularly enraged by the geopolitical barriers, emphasizing that essential food aid was often sitting in northern ports, unable to be distributed because of raging civil wars. She quickly understood that the logistics of aid were often the most frustrating barrier.
That same year, she went to Turkey on an immunization campaign, and this became a surprising example of successful mobilization that she loved to highlight. She hailed this mission as the loveliest example of UNICEF's capabilities because it showed human cooperation at its best.
She detailed the logistics, saying that the Turkish army provided trucks for transport, and incredibly, local fishmongers gave their wagons for the necessary cool storage of the vaccines. Once the date was set, this massive coordinated effort took just 10 days to vaccinate the entire country. For her, it was tangible proof of what humanity could do when it chose to cooperate, a beacon of hope against the backdrop of war and famine she usually encountered.
She continued her rigorous touring schedule, visiting Central America and then going to Sudan in 1989 during a highly sensitive mission called Operation Lifeline, ferrying food to the rebel-held South amidst a brutal civil war.
Her powerful conclusion following that experience offered a crucial distinction about the nature of global suffering. She recognized that most of the suffering she saw wasn't natural, it was political. She stated, "I saw but one glaring truth. These are not natural disasters, but man-made tragedies for which there is only one man-made solution: peace." It was a condemnation rooted in the experience of a wartime survivor.
In 1990, she was in Vietnam to collaborate on immunization and clean water programs, traveling extensively and speaking out tirelessly. But perhaps her most traumatic experience was her final trip in September 1992, just 4 months before she died, to Somalia.
She called the conditions in Somalia apocalyptic. The famine and the violence were at unprecedented levels. She gave a chilling description. I walked into a nightmare. I have seen famine in Ethiopia and Bangladesh, but I have seen nothing like this, so much worse than I could possibly have imagined.
And even though she was visibly frail and had been secretly diagnosed with cancer before this final trip, her dedication never wavered. She was scarred by what she saw, but she still held on to a fierce hope, stating that as we move into the 21st century, we still see children with enlarged bellies, their sad eyes, their wise faces that show the suffering, and that the world had a moral obligation to act.
Her humanitarian work earned her recognition that finally transcended her film career, recognizing her ultimate purpose. She received the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1992, just months before her death, and the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award posthumously in 1993 for her sustained commitment to charity. UNICEF later unveiled the Spirit of Audrey statue in her honor in 2002 at their New York headquarters. The child saved by aid became the global figure fighting to save other children.
Audrey Hepburn died peacefully in her sleep on 20 January 1993 at the age of 63 in her beloved Swiss home. The cause was a rare form of abdominal cancer known as pseudomyxoma peritonei.
The final weeks of her life offer a genuinely touching moment of friendship, bridging her final humanitarian act to her elegant public life. She had been in Los Angeles but was unable to fly on commercial aircraft after her surgery. Our longtime friend, the collaborator and designer Hubert Givenchy, arranged for a private jet, which he had filled entirely with flowers, to bring her home to Switzerland for her last Christmas.
She was interred at the small Tolochenaz cemetery, achieving the peace and privacy she had sought for so long. Though her on-screen image remains pristine, her legacy hasn't been without complex management. After her death, her two sons, Sean Hepburn Fair and Luca Andrea Dotti, became involved in legal challenges regarding her estate and the use of her likeness, particularly involving the Audrey Hepburn Children's Fund.
And this ongoing legal effort just highlights the immense and enduring value of the Audrey Hepburn brand she created. And this brings us back to the heart of her incredible life journey. Hepburn achieved the pinnacle of controlled perfection as a style icon and performer. She was, by all accounts, an intense introvert playing extroverts, projecting a serene, almost detached elegance despite enduring immense childhood trauma and privately confessing to profound self-doubt.
The sources repeatedly show us the discipline and the intense drive she had to adopt just to function in the public sphere. And this raises an important question for all of us, connecting the art of her life to the purpose of her life.
Did the deliberate, beautiful artifice of Audrey Hepburn, the controlled image, the elegant mask she perfected to overcome her own insecurities, did it function as the necessary shield?
Was that mask the mechanism that allowed the truly vulnerable, trauma-scarred person beneath to later perform her most vital and meaningful role? The raw, compassionate, and brave humanitarian we saw working tirelessly in the world's most desperate communities.
What balance of self-creation, performance, and painful authenticity does her remarkable life teach us about finding our ultimate purpose? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.